Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, you have part 2 of my SCASL project. In this project, I'm going to be covering the first 10 books that I read for the SCASL junior book list. Now, junior books are aimed at a younger audience, primarily middle grades, although that does stretch to 5th grade and sometimes up into 9th grade. So as mentioned in my previous video on this project, I am going to be going over a number of things for each book. I'm going to be giving you a sort of summary, book talk sort of idea, as well as my personal feelings on the book and my star rating. I am also going to be talking about any rep that is present in the book. I'm going to talk about the quality and the teaching potential, as well as will I have it on my classroom shelves? Do I see a hook for students? And then I'm going to give my rank out of, I guess it'll be 10 in this first video. When it comes to classroom shelves, these are now hypothetical classroom shelves because I am moving to a high school classroom. Some of these I may have on the shelf for a high school class because I will be teaching primarily freshmen, although there are some that I would not have on a high school classroom shelf, but I would have on a middle school classroom shelf. So that being said, for these first 10 books, I'm going to be filming all 10 because it says at this point in the project, I have read 10 of these books. It did help that I had read more of these books prior to starting the project. And so I will be going over each book in its ranking that I have thus far for it. And so we are going to start with The Shape of Thunder. So just like the young adult list, I have 2 books that are basically tied at the top for me for this, although unlike the young adult list, I could see this being surpassed and something slightly changing and or adjusting it. The Shape of Thunder was a book on the Goodreads Choice Awards list. When you start off this book, you have 2 main characters who are former best friends, and they were torn apart by a tragedy, a human-caused tragedy, and that human was the brother of one of the 2 girls. And it cost the life both of the brother, but also the sister of the other girl and a few other students at their school. And it has torn these friends apart, torn their families apart. There's a lot of ramifications for what has happened. And these girls are both dealing with grief in a way that for one of them is healthy, like her family is trying to get her the support that she needs, that they need, but she is still struggling with it. I believe, based on the portrayal of this one girl, that she is neurodivergent of some, I think they both are neurodivergent at some point, but Jasmine Warga never says what that neurodivergence is, and she doesn't need to. But that does affect how these girls interact. And the other girl whose brother was the one who carried out the horrific act, there's a lot of blame placed on her and her family, which is so hard. The blame placed on her, she had nothing to do with it, but she internalizes a lot of blame because she did see the gun. She saw her brother with the gun and didn't say anything about it to somebody else. And so she feels responsible and she wants to fix things. She wants to make it so that her brother never did this. And the other girl, her former best friend, wants her sister back, understandably. And so at some point, like they sort of team up on something where they are trying to make time travel happen, and they're trying this whole book. But it's not a sci-fi. It's not a time travel book. It's how these girls are trying to cope with this loss because they want to set the clock back and make it so that it never happened. And the way that Jasmine Warga deals with this is beautifully heartbreaking. And so obviously I rated this book 5 stars. As far as rep goes, there's neurodivergence. I don't remember about the ethnicities of any of the people in this book. It has been a little bit of time since I read this book. As far as quality and teaching potential, I would definitely consider this for character study, for interactions between characters and relationships. I would definitely have this on classroom shelves. And again, I said it is tied for first. Next, we have the other book tied for first, also a book that was on the Goodreads middle grades list, and that is Starfish. Starfish is a book that was told in verse, and it tells the story of a girl, and I will say right now, I don't remember a lot of these names. I don't do well anyway, and since it's been a few months since I've read it, but this girl, she has struggled with the pressure that her mother has put on her for how she looks, for her weight. She has struggled with it, not because she necessarily feels bad about her weight, but she feels bad because of everything that other people are putting on her because of it. And she has internalized a lot of this. And her father, like her parents, they have a decent relationship, but there is contention between the father and the mother because the mother wants to fix her and make her thin, but the father actually helps her get into therapy to learn how to cope and to deal with all of the anxiety and other things that have been brought on with how her mother's dealing with it. And the positive light that this book shines on therapy and how it helps her regain her mental health is brilliant. I also rated this 5 stars. As far as rep goes, you have plus size rep. That's the one rep that I remember. There may be others that I'm not remembering. As far as quality and teaching potential, if I were to say put a book club together dealing like books in verse, I would definitely use this. I think the coming of age that is dealt with here, where it's like I'm not magically fixing this bad part of me, like I'm not going through some sort of training montage, but the way that it centers therapy as her coming of age thing, trope, I would use it for that as well. I already have it on my classroom shelves, hence why I'm not holding it up right now. Same for The Shape of Thunder. I own both of those books. They're just simply in my classroom because I didn't sort through the books before I took them over to my high school classroom. Next we have Closer to Nowhere by Ellen Hopkins. Ellen Hopkins is most known for her hard-hitting young adult novels. However, this one is a middle grade. And in this middle grade, you have 2 characters whose lives have changed significantly over the past year or so. It started with the cancer diagnosis and eventual death of the male protagonist's mother, who is the twin sister of the female protagonist's mother. So our 2 protagonists are cousins. And eventually there are circumstances, so like the cancer diagnosis for the twin sister causes the mom to quit her job to go take care of her because her husband is no good. He has issues with the law and with the addictions of his own. And after she passes, her son is being raised by his dad, but he relapses, makes really bad decisions. The uncle on that side, the father's brother, like they're homeless and all sorts of things happen, so that eventually the protagonist's mother, I wish I remembered names, takes him into their family. They gain custody of him, but he has a lot to deal with because of the PTSD from what he's enduring from all the trauma and the abuse that was inflicted on him through his time living with his father and his uncle. The relationship that you see building between the 2 main characters as cousins. You have an only child who now has a sibling, basically, who she like doesn't get along with at all. So you got this dynamic that you would get between close in age siblings or siblings in general, and all the changes and the things brought along with that. But you also see the female protagonist go through developing empathy as she learns more things about what has happened, and the way that Ellen Hopkins deals with addiction, which was a primary part of a lot of her other YA novels. Even though she's extremely blunt and open about it in her YA novels, she doesn't necessarily hide anything in the middle grades, but it is described and told like age appropriately in ways that they would understand, but it doesn't hide all the effects that it has on the characters. I thought this was well done. I rated it a very high 4 stars, not quite 4.5 stars, and I do have it ranked number 3. As far as rep goes, there is the PTSD rep. I wouldn't say neurodivergence, but it has affected his mental health and all of that. As far as quality and teaching potential, I don't know necessarily that I would use it specifically. I wouldn't use it as a whole class novel, but I don't know specifically that I would use it in any book club, but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't consider it as an option if I were putting something like this together, if I were teaching middle school ELA. As far as having it on my classroom shelves, that is a definite yes. And the ranking again is number 3. Next we come to Amari and the Night Brothers, which is a booktube darling. When I read this, I have to admit that I was a little bit disappointed because I was expecting something mind-blowing by the way that everybody raved about it, and it was really good, but not mind-blowing. And so that may have contributed to my rating. I would like to read it again and go through the compile system, so when the sequel comes out, I may go ahead and just read the first one again, but I still think it was well done. So Amari, living with a single mom, she has an older brother who was doing really well, but something happened and he went missing. She goes to a primarily white institution and she has to deal with a lot of all the microaggressions and things happening towards her that are not great, not expected. And I can't remember whether she's expelled or threatened with expulsion. It's the end of the year, but she ends up discovering a case in her closet, and it's a message from her brother, and it opens this whole new world to her. It's this sort of like Men in Black bureau, but for like kids. And she has a roommate who's a were-dragon, who's adorable and I love. And it turns out that she has a lot of magic. She has a lot of potential. I forget how they describe it, but she's looked down upon for a couple of reasons. One, because she's not necessarily a legacy. She's barely a legacy because her brother invited her. But there are families that have had generations and generations. But also because she has magic. And in this world, having magic, being a magician, is taboo. It is awful. All these people that the like magicians are evil and villainous. And the way that B.B. Alston describes this sort of makes the correlation with racism and how she's treated in the quote-unquote real world. Really well done. I appreciated that. It had a lot of the stereotypical tropes for this sort of middle grade adventure magic fantasy type story, and I did appreciate it. My official rating right now is 3.5 stars, although perhaps on a reread it would go up. It is ranked 4th. So as far as rep goes, you definitely have African American, quality and teaching potential. I could see it working in a book club about a hero's journey, which is one of the themes in middle school ELA. So alongside like a Percy Jackson and other things like that, I think this would be great to have Amari as rep in there. I think it's well done. As far as having it on classroom shelves, definitely. And again, as I mentioned, rank is 4th. Next we have Tune It Out by Jamie Summer. In this book, the protagonist is a girl named Lou who lives with her single mom, and they are what you could euphemistically say down on their luck. They live in poverty. They are homeless. They live in their truck. Lou's mom takes her around because Lou has an amazing singing voice, and so she takes her around to perform and to get what little bit of money that they can do. She works as a waitress. But Lou has what later on in the book is diagnosed as sensory processing disorder. And so that means that a lot of different sounds and touch really her body cannot process. And it's something that people without this would struggle to understand. But if you think about, I mean, just think about how you would respond to certain touches that you are uncomfortable with. Maybe something slimy, maybe something like a really high-pitched drumming or something. But it's almost like for people with sensory processing disorder, something that we think as normal gets transformed into something that literally hurts. And so when you are being hurt and it's not stopping, if you don't have the necessary coping skills, you're going to respond in a way where people are going to look at you and think really negative things. which, you know, I'm not gonna say the different words or whatever that people would use. And so she's having to deal with this, and like her mom's touch is the only touch that really she can really tolerate, but she doesn't appreciate the fact that her mom is taking her around to all these places, and she doesn't really want to go and perform because even though she loves music, the ambient noises are painful to her. She doesn't want to have to hide or be humiliated by her responses. So through a series of events, the authorities discover their situation, and it's not a situation in which a child should be raised. And so she is removed from her mother's custody and she's sent across the country to live with her aunt, her mother's sister. And this is a woman that she didn't know at all, and she's wondering why. And so she learns a lot about the family dynamics, and perhaps her mom is dealing with something of her own, some sort of processing disorder, some sort of mental illness or something. That's never really named. She, through moving, is forced to face all sorts of things that are coming at her, and all this internalized guilt, I guess you could say, about what she is, and she's a freak, and it's just a matter of time before all these people figure it out and they kick me out of this fancy private school. But through all of this, she learns about her disorder, about how to, like, coping mechanisms to work with it, but it also transforms her relationship to her mother. So this is really well done. I rated it 4 stars. The rep is definitely neurodivergence. There may be some hints of LGBT with one of her friends, but it's never stated outright. As far as quality and teaching potential, I think this could be used in a themed book club. I wouldn't use it as a whole class novel. As far as keeping it on a middle school classroom shelves, I would definitely do that. And as far as rank goes, it is number 5. Next we have Ground Zero by Alan Gratz. This is one that I read back in December, so some of my memory on some of the details may be a little foggy. In this book, you have a dual timeline narrative between 2 middle school age children. One is a young boy, Latinx, I believe, growing up. His dad works at the restaurant that's at the top of the Twin Towers, and he gets suspended and goes with his dad, and so he's there on 9/11. That's one of the timelines. And then the other timeline is an Afghan girl. The opening scene is there's some sort of firefight between American soldiers and the Taliban, and they rescue some American soldiers, but the Taliban gets involved. And eventually these two storylines combine at the end, which is typical of Alan Gratz novels. It's a decent book. It's fairly well written. In my mind, it doesn't necessarily do a lot of groundbreaking things, although it does bring up certain things that I talked about with my students, not this past school year, but the school year before, when we were studying America in the Middle East at the end of the year. So I rated it 3.75 stars. Probably if I put it through Compile, it would bump it up to a 4-star. As far as rep goes, you have Latinx with one character, you have Afghan and Muslim with the other. As far as quality and teaching potential, I could see it being used as a book club book. A lot of Alan Gratz's other novels are used for it. The format, the writing style works well for it. As far as clipping it on the classroom shelves, yeah, I would have it on there. It's not necessarily one that I am urgently going to go out and buy, but it would be a decent thing to have on the classroom shelves. So as far as rank goes, it is number 6. Next we have Alone by Megan Freeman. It is a book, again, that I read previously back in December for the Goodreads challenge that I set for myself. It is another one told in verse, and I think that that part was done really well. The setup for this is there's a young girl whose parents are recently split. She's not really coping with it well, but she wants to sort of like get away from all of it, and so she sort of arranges this, you know, thing with all her friends where they each tell their parents they're staying with another person, and then they just go over to her grandparents, who I believe are out of town, and they were gonna have a sleepover, a little party over there. But none of the other friends end up showing up. And then also while she's asleep, there's a mass evacuation because there's some sort of post-apocalyptic event that is supposed to be happening. And so she is now completely alone in this entire town. and she has to figure out how to survive. And one of the things that Megan Freeman does really well is the way that she describes the loneliness that this main character faces is heartbreaking. As far as what I ultimately ended up rating it, I ended up rating it 3.25 stars. It might come out to a 3.5 or maybe a 3 if I put it through Cawpile. It took a long time. She was there alone for years, I think for 4 years. And so she's, you know, teenage. She's 17, I believe, by the end of the book. And the way that it is resolved is rather anticlimactic. There's also a scene involving a kitten, which that's all I'm going to say, which if you don't do well with things being done to animals, I would not recommend reading this. It's just one brief scene. And so ultimately, it could have been really good, but wasn't necessarily for me. As far as rep goes, I don't remember any rep being mentioned in this book. As far as quality and teaching potential, the plot itself didn't stand out enough to me to use it as part of, say, a book club selection for, say, novels in verse. I might have it as an option because, you know, you got the whole post-apocalyptic part of it, but probably not. As far as having it on the classroom shelves, I could see it being on the classroom shelves. I could see it potentially being read by, say, 9th graders, because she does age up throughout the novel, but probably just for middle schoolers. So as far as rank goes, it is number 7. Next we have Turtle Boy. I thought this book had so much potential. The way that it was set up, the way that the characters acted at the beginning, I thought this could show some real growth between the characters and what they're learning and dealing with. But ultimately, that growth never really happened, and that for me ended up making this an extremely disappointing read. So the main character, Will, when he was about 4 years old, his dad went in for a routine hernia surgery, but there were complications and his dad died. So it's completely unexpected, and it's obviously hit his mom hard. But he himself is the target of bullies because of a genetic condition that he has that causes some sort of problem with the growth of his mandible, of his chin. And so it looks like he has a receding chin, and ultimately he does end up having to have some sort of procedure done on it so that it doesn't interfere with his breathing. But he is bullied for how he looks, and he's called Turtle Boy, hence the name of the book. He happens to love turtles and has a lot of turtles. One of the things that Wolkenstein does well in this book is his portrayals of the Jewish culture. And as I'm trying to remember these different things, I am not as familiar with it as Wolkenstein clearly is, but I thought it was well done. And I've seen some Own Voices reviews that give praise for this. But this is set when Will is 12. So he's about to go through his bar mitzvah. And so he's attending these different classes, but as part of it, he has to do some sort of community service, and he doesn't really want to do any of it. He wants to just stay by himself with his turtles. But eventually he ends up having to meet with this kid who lives at a hospital because he has a mitochondrial disease that causes problems with digestion, and which will eventually kill him. And that's established at the beginning of the novel. And there's so much there set up for growth, and you see potential. You see things happening, and you're like, okay, how's he going to respond to that? Will stays a brat throughout the book. Not a huge brat, but like he's still making the same foolish, selfish decisions, yelling at his mom out of anger, making really bad decisions with how he interacts with friends all the way through the book. And then at the end, he's giving his bar mitzvah speech and is saying all these amazing things about all he's learned. And I'm like, well, just last chapter you were a brat. So when did you learn this? It fell flat for me because of the lack of character growth. So I rated it 3 stars, but an extremely low 3 stars. I think if a couple things had been 1 or 2 points lower on Cawpile, it would have been a 2.5, but it managed to scrape a 3. As far as rep goes, you definitely have rep for Jewish culture. You have rep for genetic diseases with the mitochondrial disease, with the genetic deformity. As far as quality and teaching potential, I would not use this. I think the lack of character growth is a distinct flaw in the book. As far as keeping it on my classroom shelves, if it happened to make its way onto my classroom shelves, I wouldn't say no, but I would not go out of my way to purchase it and put it on my shelves. So as far as rank goes, it is number 8, and I could potentially see it sinking lower. Next, we have All He Knew by Helen Frost. This is also a novel told in verse, although I didn't necessarily know that because I did listen to it on audiobook. This book tells the story of a young boy who was born in the middle of the Depression, and he, around 1937 or 38, he had, when he was 4, he contracted an illness that eventually left him deaf. And his family does not have a lot of money. They're struggling to know how to educate him, and they try to get him into a school for the deaf, but he is deemed unteachable and sent to an institution. If you know anything about institutions around this time, any child who didn't necessarily fit society's norms, say you were deaf, say you had Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or something like that, there weren't good options. There were really terrible options. And this family, even though they loved him, that's the only thing they could do for him. And so he ends up going to this institution and he doesn't understand. The problem for me with this book, even though the poetry is beautiful, it's well done, the narrative itself I thought was told in a haunting manner. But from the beginning, I'm like, wait a second. This is supposed to be a middle grades book and the main character is 6 years old. Now, I gave it the benefit of the doubt at the beginning because a lot of times you may have an opening chapter or two or a prologue where the child is young and something formative happens to them when they're young, and then you move forward in time to when they're, say, middle grades age. That never happened. The story goes from when Henry is 6 to when he's 10. And 10 is like the very youngest that could be considered middle grades, but he doesn't act like middle grades. He doesn't, it's hard to describe. And I believe for me, my experience with this book, my enjoyment of this book was lowered because of misset expectations. This was supposed to be a middle grades book, but I think it would have done a lot better if it had been on the children's list, which SCASL does have that. I don't read those. And there's a reason that I don't read those, because I don't tend to enjoy those sorts of books. It's not really something that appeals to me and not something that I feel like I can review really well. That was the stumbling block for me with this book. Ultimately, I rated it 3 stars because I thought it was decent. It probably, if it had been marketed correctly, if it had been put on the right list, might have gotten a higher star rating. As far as rep goes, you have disability rep for sure. As far as quality and teaching potential, I would not use it in a middle school classroom. It is too young sounding for any middle school student really to be interested in it. So I would not use it in a middle school classroom. I don't have any experience with teaching younger grades, so I can't say whether it has teaching potential for younger grades. As far as putting it on classroom shelves, if I stumbled across it, I might, but I probably would not, again, because I believe it is too young for middle grades. So as far as rank goes, simply because of that fact, it is number 9. Coming in at number 10, the book that I think that will eventually be number 20, because it is so highly problematic, and I hope none of the others are, is The Brave by James Bird. At first, I didn't necessarily think that it would be a bad book. I thought it might be a decent read because the first portion of it reads like a story that is going to do the sort of coming of age with a character who is dealing with something that society deems as not normal. And even though this character, Colin, he's never officially said that he has diagnosed OCD. He says he's OCD, but he has this thing where his brain can't help but count how many letters are in whatever is directed at him. And so before he can speak, he has to say it. And so he's picked on, obviously, for that. And there are situations that happen where, like, at the beginning of this story, he actually got into a fight because he he responded to a bully who had teased him. And the principal is, quote unquote, recommending that he goes to another school. Apparently this has happened a lot. I did see some skepticism about that. Maybe that skepticism is warranted, but a lot of times, unfortunately, the student with some sort of neurodivergence is often going to be the one that is encouraged to go somewhere that fits them better. That has happened before. The book takes a shift when his dad says, there's really no other school around here that you can go to, so I'm going to send you to go live with your mom. Now, the dad is an alcoholic. He's struggling. Colin has never met his mom. He knows his mom is Native American, but that's all he knows. He knows that his grandparents, his dad's parents, thought that she was worthless, basically, and that's why they convinced her to give all custody to his dad. So he goes to live with his mom. And this is where the problematic things come in. Not at first. You see him stumbling and realizing, ooh, that's probably not cool. I've only learned these things from like movies and stuff. I'm not going to say here necessarily what the problems of representation are, because I am not Ojibwe. But I noticed a very big difference in how Ojibwe culture was discussed and presented in this book, comparing it to The Firekeeper's Daughter. The Firekeeper's Daughter does such an amazing job with this. It is own voices. She is Ojibwe. Angeline Booley is Ojibwe. James Bird claims that this is quote-unquote own voices because his mother is Ojibwe. But no one has been able to verify this. I started to become uncomfortable with certain things in it. And so I looked up some reviews, and immediately some of the first things that I was seeing were own voices reviews saying this is problematic. The way that this is being portrayed is a problem. So I would direct you there to how they describe it instead of me describing it. And so, of course, after I read that, I'm not done reading the book or listening to the book. I start to notice it more. And then this character, so there's this quote unquote love story with his next door neighbor. And I get that at first. It's very reasonable for a 12-year-old boy to see a girl and go, oh, she's amazing, I'm in love with her. That's typical for a 12-year-old boy. However, it's not necessarily going to be this love story that it turns out to be in this book. Total poppycock, ridiculous. At the end, I was gagging with how syrupy, sweet, and mystical and awful this book was. I have a feeling this will be 20th in my list, but right now it's 10th. Extremely problematic. So here is my ranking. I did go over these in order, and I hope you will join me in my next video, which will most likely be the second half of the young adult list. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.